Uh, Welcome back to this breakout session, Analyst Corner, the secret source of digital OneOffice framework, the future of business operation. To walk us through this presentation, we have Phil Fersht from HFS Research. Phil is an acclaimed author, analyst, and visionary in IT services and BPO, the digital transformation of enterprise operations and cognitive automation strategies. Phil coined the terms the as-a-service economy and digital OneOffice, which describe HFS Research vision for future of global operations and impact of cognitive automation and disruptive digital business models. Prior to founding HFS in 2010, Phil has held various analyst roles for Gartner and IDC and was outsourcing marketplace leader for Deloitte Consulting across the United States, UK, and Singapore. Over the past 20 years, Phil has lived and worked in Europe, North America, and Asia, where he has advised on hundreds of operation strategy, outsourcing, and global business service engagements. Phil, over to you.
Thank you. Wonderful. Okay. Can you hear me okay at the back? Perfect. So it's a fairly intimate crowd here, so we can keep this a fairly interactive, informal discussion. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we call the digital OneOffice framework and what this means to sort of collapsing these barriers that we see between the front and the back office, which has been such a relevant topic of conversation just in the last couple of days here. I think I had the introduction, so I don't have to go through too much of that again, but I've been in the services and technology industry for 20 years now, 15 of them as an industry analyst with IDC Gartner before founding HFS in 2010, and then 5 of them as an advisor. And it's much more fun actually writing about it and talking about it. So an analyst career is what I chose to stay with. At HFS, we like to consider ourselves a fairly disruptive business. We call it the Analyst 2.0 model, where we literally have over 1.5 million hits a year on our website. We believe in a much more open research model. Many people refer to us as like the Facebook of the analyst industry because we make so much of our information available to people across the world and really look at this sort of community model as something we do that's important. But when we look at the industry today, we look at something we think is termed as sort of digital operations. There's so many people now coming from software organizations and automation, AI, digital tech. There's people who have come from service provider backgrounds, consulting firms, and there's people who have come from the buy-side organizations and GICs, etc. And we're really seeing, I think, an emerging industry that we term as digital operations, and we focus on these 6 sort of change agents that we see truly impacting the business today. So that's smart analytics, RPA, AI, global sourcing, blockchain, and digital business models. We're also the first research company to actually introduce this lovely concept of RPA to the industry in 2012. I don't know if you're familiar with a famous blog we wrote called Greetings from Robotistan, Outsourcing's Cheapest New Destination. But this really caught on, and before we knew it, it had been picked up by The Economist, Business Week, all these other different publications, and RPA was born, and we're unfortunately responsible for a lot of that happening as companies got more involved in the sector. And our vision is all about defining future business operations using our OneOffice framework, which I'll take you through today, and it's about looking at these digital operations, change agents that are very important to the business. We have some pretty exciting partnerships over in the UK with Cambridge University. We're doing an AI summit at Gonville Keys College, which is the home of Professor Stephen Hawking, in July. So hopefully some of you will get to come and meet us there. And we also do a number of global summits, mainly for buyers of services in the US. We're doing summits in Australia for the first time. We're going to Bangalore for our first India summit in September, as well as Boston in the United States. So I think one of the reasons we're all here is because we've realized while the comfort zone is a really beautiful place, nothing grows there, right? So we need to get out of the comfort zone and really think about where industry is shifting. So I'm going to talk a bit about this digital fog, and I think it's lifting across the industry now. I think we've had a couple of years of, I think our own industry's been impacted by the lovely term fake news. But in the last couple of years in particular, everybody has jumped on bandwagons from digital to AI to, IoT was suddenly huge, and now everyone's talking about artificial intelligence and blockchain, and suddenly, if it's not newsworthy, we're jumping on the next bandwagon. So I think what's happening now is the fog is beginning to lift, and people are looking at what is actually real here, what can I do for my organization can actually have some impact, and I think we'll start to see more of this reality start to bed in across the industry as the year drags on. I'll also talk to you a bit about the concept of what's happening in the world is about achieving more with less. This is where a lot of these new platforms and merging ideas are taking us. It's about how can we deliver more with the people we have, with the talent we have, using better technology and tools and platforms to do that. I've also got some data to share on the emergence of RPA and AI, which is really bridging this old world to the new world. Because when we look at the front office, it's really looking at B2C. It's how do we interact with our customers in a touchless, multi-technology way, and then we get to the middle to back office, it gets very sort of B2B centric. And so how do you bridge that new world to the old world with everything we do? So I'll start with data finding. We did a major study of 460 enterprise leaders of operations back in November, and we asked them what the business drivers are having the biggest impact on their business. And you can see at the top here, the number one business driver is this shift towards digital, virtual experiences, and less of physical face-to-face engagements. So that's the number one business driver that operations leaders are seeing today impacting them. And then close to that, you can see a focus around how do you make more predictive decisions based on rapidly accessible real-time data. And then how can you combat the threat of digitally disrupting competitors? How can you micro-target customers with hyper-personalization and product customization? So it's all about data. And this is where everything is eventually coming back to. Now, we all know that nearly every enterprise today has appointed a chief digital officer. Eventually, this is going to probably go back to, well, what about a chief data officer? What about somebody who's looking at how we're utilizing and managing data across our organization? Because in that same study, we asked enterprise operations leads to estimate the proportion of structured versus unstructured data in our organization. And only 22% of organizations have more than half their data structured. So if you think about it, over 3/4 of enterprises today have more than half their data completely in an unstructured format. Now, people in AI, I'll tell you, that doesn't matter because they can develop algorithms and tools to basically fix all that. But the bottom line is that unstructured data plagues enterprises. Every data set you have that isn't converged in the right way is impeding your ability to make strategic decisions for your business. In terms of disruption of digital, we also ran a study right at the beginning of this year looking at the impact of digital on organizations, and we asked, I think, 395 digital leads whether their two top competitors were the same today as they were in 2014. Okay. And what we can see here is that 29% have already seen their top two competitors shift in just the last 3 or 4 years. And we asked them to look out the next 3 or 4 years as well. Over a third think their competitors are going to change again. This is actually quite dramatic. If you think about, your top competitors are on a shift, on a cycle that is actually getting quite interesting. On the more positive side, we also asked companies whether they saw opportunities trumping threats with digital, and only 19% actually are very concerned about the level of disruption, whereas 42% see more opportunities compared to threats that they saw 2 years ago. So I think what you can read from this is that people were very sort of wary of digital business models a couple of years ago, Now they've figured out how to take your traditional business and take advantage of the digital channels you need to take to be effective and successful in your market. In terms of making these shifts, though, this same pool of 395 buyers of digital actually believe that culture is what holds back their enterprises significantly when it looks to going through a digital transformation. So 51% actually think it's somewhat to highly significant that the current mindset and culture within their company is what is holding them back the most. And as you look at some of the changes that are happening in the industry right now, you can pretty much fix a line of code in 24 hours if you have to. You can put in new tech when you need to. The technology is here today. It's how do you change around that tech that is all encompassing. I just spent a couple of days at an AI conference for Fortune 50 companies, and for 2 whole days, we pretty much spoke about how do you change with AI. We only spent about an hour actually talking about the technology. So the real issue impacting enterprises right now is how do you change around the tech? How do you align the business with the IT, with what is happening in the industry? I'd also like to, have some words of caution when we did speak to these businesses this year about, how they felt compared to their competitors when it came to were they ahead or not when it came to digital capability. And you can see here the lowest performers. These are the lowest performers in that study by revenue, for example, and business performance. 60% actually feel they're well ahead of their competition when it comes to being competitive, whereas when we looked at the highest performers, only 37% felt they were well ahead of the competition. So quite a lot of complacency and arrogance, because when we look at those who think they're well behind or slightly behind, we're only looking at about 14 to 15% of businesses actually think they're going to fall behind their competitors. So there's a certain amount of arrogance in the market, despite the fact that people are wary that they could be disrupted, and they need to be on top of their game. In terms of the same group of companies worrying about damage, in terms of customer acquisition costs and lower margins that digitally native competitors are inflicting on their business, only 22% fear notable damage in their business in the next 2 to 3 years. So all this talk about amplify digital disruption, basically 78% of businesses are not worried that that's going to really damage their business. People feel that they're on top of it, they know where they're going. Okay. So let's remember, technology by itself is not the real disruptor. Uber didn't kill the taxi business. It was limited taxi access and fare control. Netflix, they didn't kill Blockbuster. It was these ridiculous late fees. Apple didn't kill the music industry. It's us being forced to buy all those full-length albums, which really hurt the music industry. Amazon didn't kill other retailers. Is what harmed other retailers. And Airbnb, that's not killing the hotel industry. It's having limited availability and pricing options, which is killing it. So these platforms basically enabled greater customer centricity. So it's not being customer concentric, which has been the biggest threat to any business today. So let's get on to the digital OneOffice. It's about collapsing these barriers between the front, the middle, and the back. It's about a framework for this touchless digital customer experience and the creation of an intelligent single office that can enable it. It describes the design and use of interactive channels that drive customer engagement, namely, mobile, social, text, chat, these type of omni-channels we're familiar with. And the OneOffice describes the enabling technologies such as unified analytics and cognitive automation that can drive real-time predictive capabilities and an engaging digital experience that unifies all the stakeholders across the organization, its customers, its partners, and its employees. It's where the organization's people, intelligence, processes, and infrastructure come together as one integrated unit with one set of unified business outcomes tied to exceeding customer expectations. And here we can see a sort of a pictorial of how we sort of really envisage this digital OneOffice organization. And here on the left is really, this is the B2C part of the company. This is the front office. This is where we design how customer-centric processes should look. This is where we look at the mobile engagement, the social interactive engagement. How can we think outside the box laterally, use design thinking techniques, for example, to be smart about designing what our customer experience looks like. So, I went and visited Airbnb's contact center last year, and I was surprised. You've got this amazing digital business. Then you go and visit its back end, and it was basically a bunch of legacy technology and a BPO firm delivering it for them. So it's interesting that while you can have these incredible front ends, is there a true linkage between the front, the middle, and the back? So what enables that digital OneOffice? So the first thing, it's like the nervous system, the thing that incepts and processes all inputs for the company. We call this the digital underbelly, and this is where we get all those those technology processes that enable standardization and like cloudification and the security of what you do. It's where you turn manual into digital. It's where you cloudify. It's where you really move that technology into a clouding standardized format. Then we think about what we call intelligent digital support functions. This is where we see the emergence of more intelligent F&A, HR, procurement, marketing, customer service. This is where we start to think about what we term as like the human middleware of the business. How do you link together support processes with the front processes of the organization? How do you wrap these activities around the needs of the customer? So how do you start to think about broader processes? For example, rather than thinking about order to cash, why not customer to cash, for example? These types of things. Spending time with a healthcare provider the other day, which is doing phenomenally well, and they were saying how all IT decisions now were being made around patient care. So is this right for the patients? Will this improve patient care and patient service? So making decisions around unified outcomes, even if they're as simple as that, is really critical. And then finally, we think about intelligent digital processes, which is where we look at things like machine learning, predictive analytics, even blockchains coming into play here, as we look at how do you make your framework more intelligent, more predictive. Stop basing everything on historical archives of data. Someone described to me as, data swamps. Forget data lakes, right? Start thinking about how do you make predictive decisions that are actionable, that take you forward as a business. And so when we look at, the types of technologies that are helping us enable this and helping really glue together these silos, you can look at things like, remote desktop automation, robotic process automation, for example, at that underbelly level. Lots of machine learning capability, which is, more human-centric, managed, supervised, algorithmic capabilities to help link data together, make data more intelligent, and artificial intelligence and these types of things. But that's the overarching framework. That's how we see this digital OneOffice emerging. And this sort of brings us to a study that we just completed, hasn't even been published yet, where we spoke to 100 C-level executives, and we explained this model. We went through it in detail with them. And we said, what do you see as the primary benefits of breaking down these barriers between the front and the back office and moving towards this framework, this OneOffice framework? And they all said, 57% said it was better data to drive the business forward. Overwhelmingly was the number one desire from the C-suite to move into this type of framework. And then it was having stronger alignment of business operations to business outcomes. So these two are inextricably linked, in my opinion. Right? If you want better data to take the business forward, you have to have all your key facets of the organization in sync in these broader process sets, so you can start to really wrap the needs of the company, the needs of the customers around these common outcomes. So let's think about these fundamentals then of OneOffice. It's about standardized processes, right? It's about making things work simpler. It's about having more automated, real-time and converged data. It's about bringing the data together. As I was saying earlier, as a manager yourself, if you have siloed data sets in areas that are important to you, and you're not really bringing together that information, you're restricting your ability to be strategic in your job. It's about having multiple avenues to source talent as and when you need it on demand. You know, whether it's through outsourcing or contracting or hiring people, right, or having a different partner relationship with your advisor. It's about managing diversity of the workforce. It's an increasingly cross-cultural, cross-geographic workforce that we're managing today, which means you're going to be having teams of maybe veteran executives working with millennials who have different ways of thinking and doing things and mindsets. It's about understanding more cultural sensitivities better. It's about understanding geopolitics. Some people like to talk about geopolitics now and other people don't, but you know, these are things that are coming into play in the workforce. Having a flatter structure. You know, a lot of folks, particularly millennials now, like to go into environments where they feel part of the decision making. They don't feel these big layers of hierarchy that's really taking them over, that they can have more of these loosely fluid conversations. You know, I've seen people from like Google, Apple, for example, getting hired into you know, legacy insurance companies and banks just so they can bring a different non-hierarchical mindset to their organization. It's also, you know, thinking about more dynamic management. So how can you have more fluid, ongoing, dynamic integration between your staff and your managers as you evolve as an organization, less of the sort of the weekly tick-the-box meeting and much more of the dynamic, ongoing management style. So when we start to think about having more integrated data sets and more integrated functions and more common outcomes across these functions, it's about how do we work together in a much more highly energized, you know, highly intricate manner. So surviving as a digital worker, I thought it was kind of fun to talk to a lot of companies about ways that we're becoming more successful in our jobs. And my personal belief is it's much more about attitude than it is about skills, right? Having programming language capabilities is actually becoming, unless you're really into Python and R and some really, you know, really out there, you know, algorithmic development, most people need to understand how to use basic data and how to make data work for them more effectively and how to use tools better now. So it's about, you know, what tools have you looked at that can add real value to your business? So when I talk to people today evaluating various RPA tools, for example, these are not IT professionals. The people leading that conversation in many organizations are the business professionals. Because there's too many situations where IT is still managing a lot of these digital automation AI applications like they were apps in the past. And it doesn't work because you can't say we're doing automation and we're going to sign a license up for these 10 bots and then go to the business line manager and say, here you go run this bot on this process. They're going to say, why should I do that? You know, and they'll come up with every excuse why it's not going to work for them. So you have to get the buy-in now of the business line with the IT line to make these things successful. I think it's about energizing your colleagues, getting to know them and include them in your initiatives and vice versa. You know, become more inclusive. Get to know people in your organization who you might not have got to know before. I think many of us got too sucked into that sort of model where you sit behind your computer, you just deal with the people you need to deal with. I think being able to sort of socialize what you're doing, why it's important, with many more of your staff, getting them to do the same with you, is energizing people around you. It's getting so important now as we look at the sort of emerging companies on how you add value as more and more of our routine tasks are getting automated and moved into different models. How do you add value to new business wins? Can people see that value? So you've got to be a better communicator across your business. People have to see your value and you have to see their value more aggressively. How have you contributed to corporate initiatives? Do you understand where the corporate is going and are you bringing those into your day-to-day life? And then what new relationships have you made that add value to your business, right? Are you going out into the ecosystem and getting to know new technology firms, new digital companies, fintechs, insurtechs, healthcare techs, all these types of businesses? So becoming a really good relationship player as well as a relationship person is very important as you look at the next phase of where things are going with our businesses. So let's move to why it's all about achieving more, I think, with less. And this was it's quite a famous chart now, but we do this annual study with KPMG on the state of operations and outsourcing, and we've been doing it every year for about the last 9 years. And we ask them, ask about 400 plus major enterprises, are you increasing your use of offshore within your outsourcing, right? And in 2014, you can see the data in the red here across F&A, HR, procurement, etc. This is just back in 2014, 3.5 years ago. 20% were increasing F&A, 13% HR, 20% were increasing app dev, 23% infrastructure. We asked the same question earlier last year, and you can see the shift just in the last 3 years. Suddenly, companies actually are starting to decrease the offshore component of F&A and HR, and in IT, it's significantly decreased as well, but still, still increasing, but at a decreasing rate. But what's clearly happening here is the labor arbitrage model is slowly running out of steam, and in some cases, almost turning negative. When we look at the performance of the top 75 leading service providers here, from 2010 to Q3 2017, the latest data we actually have, you can actually see here the steady decrease to the bottoming out of the whole service provider market from a revenue growth perspective, sort of bounced along at about 2%, but now is actually showing signs of picking up again to a more healthier growth clip. But what you can see here is that the whole of the services industry flattened out, it's coming back a bit. So where is it all heading? It's actually growing, this thing. So despite the fact that revenues have got a lot flatter, but still growing, headcount is shrinking a little bit, will shrink more. We can share some data with that with you as well if you need it. We actually see the growth of the industry actually at about 5% over the next 5 years. When we look at the size of the market here, so it's about 1.1 trillion up to about 1.3 in 2022. What we then did was we looked at both business operations services and IT services by what we term as OneOffice versus traditional. So traditional is the traditional model, so it's services really bought by FTE, by time and materials bases. And you can see here in the blue, these are the traditional services are actually decreasing by 4% over the next 5 years, whereas the OneOffice services, which are basically services that are built much more around the operations framework in OneOffice, built around outcomes, is actually increasing exponentially by 18%. It's very similar when we look at IT services. We see OneOffice IT growing by 20% and traditional, or I hate to say it, legacy IT decreasing by 5%. Sure. Yeah. So when we see the OneOffice framework that I described, we're looking at spend on IT services that was aligned to that type of framework and business model, as opposed to spend that just went on IT services for the sake of buying a dollar for a dollar, buying an hour's time for an hour's development work or something like that. So we class OneOffice IT by tracking all the contracts that are being signed today in the market and making estimates on where we see these changing to contracts that are getting signed around more outcome-driven, volume-driven models that are aligned to getting towards that type of... So it's more project-based approach? Yes. So, and it's the more the thinking around this outcome-based, but also a total cost of ownership approach. So we're starting to see this a lot more. I don't know if you saw a couple of these really big IT renewals that got done in the last few weeks. I think TCS did a couple of big ones with Nielsen and Transamerica, but you're actually seeing like 5-year renewals being signed where the provider is guaranteeing quite significant reductions in the annual spend based on the fact that they feel they can deliver the same services with less effort and less people. And that's really what is happening here, is the client is now saying, we trust you to run our services, but we want to buy these services tied to outcomes as opposed to tied to effort. And I think that's the big shift that we're seeing in the industry in general, is this, we're changing the way we're buying and selling this stuff. That has to happen first, as opposed to just buying things in a very rigid way that has been, you know, one FTE to one data point.
So, just to clarify the same point.
Yes.
On OneOffice. Maybe traditional buying customer support, buying contact center, call center,
Yeah.
as opposed to finance and accounting or back office.
Yeah.
So when you say OneOffice, are you talking of an integrated service engagement which integrates back office and front office and then changing the way they actually buy services?
Yeah, so it's hard to get as scientific as saying these are integrated between front and back, but what we can look at here is, so here's operations, for example, so here's your call center, F&A, HR, is we're starting to look at how these services are being acquired, tied to outcomes and KPIs akin to the OneOffice model. So people start to buy, for example, call center services tied more to customer outcomes than I'm just going to buy one body per call sort of thing. So, yeah.
So in this digital OneOffice, is that the concept, or is OneOffice a concept by itself as well? Because if it is digital, then that's the qualifier. We're talking about digital technologies.
It integrates everything.
Yeah.
Integrates.
So in that construct, if you just take a legacy service like contact center,
Yeah.
and then you make it outcome based,
Yeah.
then really that's not OneOffice, right? That's a different kind of engagement.
I think so. We've tried to sort of bring the two together. So digital is really bringing in all the cool technology you're using in your personal life, like your mobile capability, social, into the workplace. And then the OneOffice piece is more about the moving from inputs to outcomes, more about having services wrapped around the needs of the customer. So digital OneOffice together is bringing this sort of digitally touchless environment to the whole operations of the enterprise. And I think it's hard to do one without the other, but you can technically take a call center engagement, which is very people-based, and try and tie it much more around outcomes and that sort of thing. So you can sort of OneOffice things without having a major impact on the technology, but it's going to be very hard to do when you want to integrate data between the front and the back. So.
The outcome-based pricing has been around for a good number of years.
Yeah.
As people know, particularly know in the VPN sector and the call center sector, know it very well. I come to the NASSCOM conference in 2005. People were talking about replacing 2000, it replacing simply the cost, FTE cost, and so on. So the industry's been well aware of it. But I wanted to come back to it. It's a really interesting discussion. Presentation, I have to say, but it's the question of the digitalization of services.
Yeah.
Now, this is the issue, or the issue that I've had. I've read some of the HFS's stuff in Leslie Willock's book, as you're well quoted in that one. I'm sure you're aware of it. And this is the extent to which the desired standardization is cost-driven, but it's the costs of the cost-drivenness when it comes to the specific tacit knowledge, let's say, of voice services or what have you. That still, I mean, are we saying then that voice services are not capable of adding value to the end-to-end process, and that cost reduction through standardized services, getting more for less, which can cut against the value that's generated by tacit knowledge and voice services? It's an important question.
It is an important question, and I'm actually trying to touch upon it in the next stage, where I'm going to talk a bit about the impact of automation and AI, which is, how do you get more for less? Because I completely get what you're saying. So we were talking about outcome-based pricing, as you said, 10, 12 years ago, but the difference then was it was service providers basically saying, we'd like to price on outcomes so the customers aren't going to keep questioning how many FTEs are we providing all the time. There was nothing worse if, the customer said, outcomes is all great, but I still want my 500 FTE. And the providers want to say, well, I think I can deliver that same same service of 300 FTEs, but I want you still to spend the same as if I had 500. But the reality then was, beyond just doing stuff with less, using process transformation, you couldn't really do it. You couldn't really add value by decreasing the staff delivery. Now what is happening is by doing some smart things to using RPA tools and certain things like that, digital platforms, providers are now getting more bold at taking on these engagements and reducing the staff workload because they think they can do it using the tech. Now, as we look at these outcome deals that are being signed today, the providers are taking a much larger amount of risk. So they're basically saying, okay, you're paying for 500 FTEs today. I'm going to deliver this same service back to you, and I'm going to reduce the cost by 40% over the next 5 years. But I'm also going to meet the same KPIs. I'm going to deliver you the same quality of service in 5 years, or I'm going to get screwed. And that's the difference. So these providers now are doing a lot of automation on their own delivery, so they feel they can still deliver the same capability with less people. And that's really what's happening. Now, is this proven? Is this going to work? It's probably going to be way more painful than we ever thought possible, because we've seen how long it's taken just to get to this point with labor arbitrage-driven services. So. Sure. Yeah, so this is business operations services. So this is your spending on services to manage the front office and the back office and industry specific. So this is really where BPO is emerging to. So this is your HR, F&A. These are your old BPS type services. So people call it BPM, BPO, we call it operations. Getting easier now, so I think it's a question of terminology. Here is your IT services, which is really your consulting, operational support related to apps, infrastructure, and application lifecycle. So what we're trying to do is redefine the market. So rather than talk about ITO, BPO, same old, same old, same old, we're trying to look at it more through a lens of this is buying by the legacy model, this is buying by the as a service or outcomes-based model. So it's sort of this takes me to, the next phase, which is the fact that I think outsourcing, as we've been talking about, is really dying a bit. We asked a large number of clients in this operations study we did at the end of last year, how would you best describe your current service provider relationship with your digital transformation journey? And you can see here, the highest quartile of performers. So these are your highest revenue, highest performing businesses. 57% describe their primary service provider as a true partner which proactively innovates and invests with them to find new thresholds of value to achieve co-defined business outcomes. So 57% of clients today who are achieving high revenue growth and high performance now feeling that their provider is much more of a partner than just an outsourcer, because when you look at the second piece, only 34% of high performers felt that their primary service provider was just a competent partner that provides access to skill, scale, and domain knowledge on a per head count model. So this in the middle here, these are your traditional outsourcing partners. On the left, these are more partners. So you talk to any outsourcing provider today, they'll tell you they want clients to partner with them. They just don't want to be told what to do and do that sort of master-slave type engagement with their clients. And then very few now see their outsourcer as an efficient vehicle to drive out cost and improve efficiency. So the highest performing businesses today are now viewing their primary relationships as much more strategic than they were 2 or 3 years ago, where it was really, we pay IBM or Infosys or whoever $1 and we just expect back some services that we paid for. Now it's much more, we want somebody to take risks with us, to co-innovate with us. So if you're looking at these 5-year engagements where you're taking a TCO approach to your spend, you're taking an outcomes-based approach to your spend, you need a partner who's going to actually understand your business. So you can work with that partner to figure stuff out with you, not just do what you tell them to do. So you start to need partners as opposed to these sort of just competent service partners to do work for you. So getting on to that, sorry. Oh no, I'm good if we.
So the question here is that in a more broader sense,
Yeah.
how does this concept, digital technologies require greater interaction between greater pace of collaboration. How is it impacting the broader outsourcing landscape? Because there is also insourcing that is going on at the same time.
Yep.
And so this was about partner relationships, and there are vendor partners who are engaging in that partnership and those not. But how are enterprises reconfiguring themselves, reconfiguring their resourcing strategies, outsourcing strategies,
Yep.
in the light of what digital technology requires?
So it's a very, very good question. So it's how are clients today reconfiguring their outsourcing strategies in light of the emergence of a lot of this tech. So there's been a lot more focus on, I think, enterprises trying to do more themselves. So buying a lot of these RPA tools, digital platforms, trying to experiment with COEs, doing a lot more investigative. I mean, we're an analyst firm, and we've been inundated with end users calling us more than ever before because they're all doing their own research, right? So I do think there's a more aware, self-empowered buyer coming along who's understanding this stuff. And a lot of it is, I feel, because the present and the future are starting to collide. People are less clear about what's going to happen in 6, 12 months down the road. There's a lot more awareness now about what's available in the market, what's going on, the level of sophistication. So I think at this point, there's been a lot of clients maybe pulling back a little bit, trying to evaluate what they have, where they want to go. Particularly US firms are under a lot of pressure to pull back on offshore because of Trump and all this stuff. It really did make an impact on the model out there. For example, you've got...
It's just your model is that
Yeah.
the circulatory system, the nervous system,
Yeah.
one office. Now, of that one office, how much do you want to deal with the other?
That's right.
And he'd be a great partner, but he still has a separate balance sheet beyond. And he has more clients. So therefore, how are, and this is now core. Digital technology, very few will say is non-core. It's just an enabling thing. So it's taking center stage. It's like GE is now digital industrial.
That's right.
So now, how are people looking at their sourcing plan? How much is that getting impacted?
Yeah, I think the role of the service partner is changing quite dramatically in certain instances. So in the banking space, particularly in North America and parts of Europe, a lot of branches are being closed down because people don't want to go to the branch anymore. They just want to go online, maybe on the phone, use their apps. So it puts much more strain on shared services and outsourcing to now service banking customers because they're not going to the branches anymore. They're closing them down, so everyone's calling up or going online. So it's changing the whole nature of the consumer banking industry. How do you service your customers? And so, I'm experiencing with my conversation with banks, they're looking to outsource more than less because this is becoming less and less of a differentiator, right? It's like insurance, for example. Delivering the insurance product is now a relatively commoditized capability. The differentiator is in having the best risk analysts, right? Having the best sales and marketing, right? Same with banking now. It's like a lot of this stuff is becoming commodity driven. So a lot of this, the onus on outsourcing is to take on more of the operational service delivery. And as you talk to clients about who are you hiring, what are your hiring plans like for the next couple of years, smart clients are looking for entrepreneurs, they're looking for innovators, they're looking for great partners, people who can network, and they're not saying we're going to hire tons of data analysts, we're going to hire process experts. No. That stuff is either staying in, or they're looking at partners to come and do it for them. So I actually think the more clients get pushed to the front office, the more they're looking at their whole supporting, enabling back office, thinking, am I going to go out and hire 200 RPA developers? God, no. You know, where do I get my data scientists from who cost me 200K a year now coming out of Harvard or whatever, right? You know, people are, I think that there's a whole new wave of outsourcing that is opening up because of what is happening. And it's a different type of outsourcing, because just because you were great at delivering one type of service doesn't mean you're going to be great at the next type of service. You know, I love these analogies like Xerox. Fantastic product back in its day, had more patents than IBM at one point, but they could never gravitate to doing anything else. So they eventually just got acquired by, I think, Fujifilm. But it was a great example of a company which couldn't evolve. And when we look at today's service providers, can Infosys or TCS, or can these companies truly evolve to delivering this next wave of services? Or is there going to be a new wave of maybe smaller, more niche providers coming along who are going to take their place? Now, barriers to entry are very, very high in this market, but I do believe that not everybody is going to make the switch successfully. Or you might just want to say, let's just hang around and deliver a legacy service and just slowly get smaller. I mean, Unisys has been doing it for years. I hope there's no one from Unisys here. Okay.
It's a related question.
Yeah.
I think we've got to be, or an observation on the question.
Right.
I think we have to be careful to distinguish between outsourcing and offshoring. Yes. Because the question that you're raising is a really important geographical question in terms of the uneven development of business services across the
I
world.
want to give a metric. There's a metric to support that.
Well,
in the Indian industry, in the Indian IT industry, for the last 5 years, GICs, in-house centers, are showing a stronger rate of growth year on year than are the service providers.
Yep, that's absolutely true.
So the mix is changing, and people are redrawing what is core, what is not core in a digital era. What is core and not core? And so that is driving a lot of the churn in how people are sort of reevaluating what needs to be. That's another thing that's going on outside.
Yep.
So that's just a thought.
Well, I think it's also a big endorsement on the improvement of talent and availability in India, is that companies are now thinking, hey, there's some good talent over here, you know, especially technical talent, engineering talent. I'd rather hire my own, manage it myself. It might cost a little bit extra, but I can maintain a competitive advantage if I can get the better talent in than use third parties. And that has been continuing as big companies have got better at managing global workforces. So whoever you are now, if you're a big global business or even a small global business, you need to be good at managing cross-cultural, diverse people. I mean, my company has 50 staff across about 7 countries, you know, and it's you start to hire talent wherever you want it, wherever you get it, wherever you think you can get it in. So.
Offshore may grow because you need the right shore for that talent.
Yeah.
But I think what's going to be outsourced will not be default or into the way it's not going to follow a whole pattern that might change.
I mean, I would imagine the Philippines contact center industry is feeling particularly vulnerable. I don't know.
Yeah, actually, I've got some data on it I can share, but yeah, the Filipino contact center industry will continue to increase employee base in the next 5 years because it almost has a monopoly on voice because it's really good at it. It's low cost, affordable. Everyone likes, if you're in the customer service business, everyone likes working with the Philippines. It's great value, great attitude. Attrition isn't bad. You know, we think that market will continue. But you see, you know, US-based call centers, that's in trouble. You know,
So Phil, a related question.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about as a service,
Yeah.
at one level it is financial engineering, right? In the
Yeah.
sense that whatever is your input cost, you're converting that into output metrics, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, you're also basically talking about an amalgamation of the front office and, you know, back office, which is, I don't even say is an 800-pound gorilla. It's probably a 10-ton gorilla, you know, something like that, right? And you also need to have a lot of very, very modern digital capabilities. I'm talking
Yeah.
about, you know, design thinking, digital technologies, customer engagement, all that kind of stuff, right? Now, And if we look at the customer organizations themselves, they are highly siloed, right? They're not organized in the manner of the, the OneOffice, and
Yep.
the budgets are also siloed, right? And even the service providers, if you look at large BPO provider, he won't have the, or she won't have the abilities to actually generate this transformation. And this is also something that happens over a period of time, right?
Yep.
You can't reinvent everything in like 6 months. So what are the actual trends that you're seeing in the marketplace? Any case studies or something like that?
Yeah, I think you get some companies have reached the point where they realize they can't really change. They're stuck. They're kind of, this is the way we're going to be. It's going to be really difficult to evolve from this siloed organization. So they're trying to find ways to build around that. So one is to obviously discover your digital channels and make sure you're at least doing some transformation in the front where it's really important to stay competitive in the market. Then what do you do with a back office that's siloed, expensive, holding you back? One of the major insurance carriers in the US, for example, I think they've got green screen technology, and what they've done is they've gone and acquired a couple of startups in the US to basically rebuild the whole company in a completely different environment and then quietly shift the model across. You're also seeing a lot of these emerging like digital banks appear in the industry. Most of them will get acquired by the legacy banks, and eventually the legacy banks will just take on their models. So I think there'll be a bit more of a M&A type way of seeing the shifts going on with these models. Sometimes that's to its detriment. I was looking the other day, I met the guy who runs shared services for Expedia, the online travel site. All they do is buy up everybody else. They've literally bought all the other online travel companies. Like Trivago, yeah, we're going to get them next type of thing. And you see how these businesses are operating through consolidation because they had a better model. And it's the same is going to happen eventually in most industries. Now, banking is highly regulated, and I think there's instances where you can't really make automation work well in banks because I think in the US, for example, every process still needs to be overseen by a human being, right? So there's things like that that are holding it back. But you will see, I think, consolidation and merging of models and new ways of doing things. It's not going to happen everywhere, but it will happen in a lot of industries.
So if we extrapolate some of the case studies that you mentioned, the likely scenario is that more and more traditional companies are going to be digital native enterprises, and there's going to be a lot of insourcing of AI automation kind of capabilities, not necessarily outsourcing based on KPIs.
That's right. No, I think you're absolutely right. I do not think if you're running a business today and you'll hire people in your core industry, your core business, to make you competitive. Now, if it's going to make you more competitive to build algorithms within your business, you will hire some highly competent skills to do that for you, or you'll contract it in. But I do think the whole employment model is changing very much from, when I was talking about surviving as a digital worker, that's surviving as an employee. If you're going to be a worker within an organization, you need to be part of that glue. You need to be a conduit of information within that company. You need to be glued into what you're doing. Because if you behave like a contractor within your company, eventually you'll be contracted out or automated or whatever. So I think there's a fundamental shift going on with how people work, how people contract work, how companies are evolving. And most companies today aren't looking to grow through employee acquisition. They're looking to grow through increased revenue, increased digitalization, increased product. And as we look at our service industry, it's no different. All the leading service providers today are looking to grow through getting a little smaller, not through keep increasing the headcount, and that's part of the big shift. Okay, how are we doing for time? Wow. Let's do an hour. Okay. I could just sort of take you through some of the other bits I was showing. Was, one of the things I thought was quite interesting, just looking at the changing shift of some of these deals. You probably saw a massive automation deal, RPA-led automation deal got signed a couple of months ago in Japan, where they're very proud of automation in Japan because they grew up in a manufacturing culture, and to automate is something that is smart, something they like to do. And in many cases, because there's real problems with overworking and burnout and that sort of thing, and they've got massive skill shortages, a lot of their banks are looking to take on more automated products. But we saw this deal signed, 60 million a year is spent, Sumitomo Group, using, I think IBM is the main partner there and a couple of others, on UiPath software and a couple of other, but it's mainly UiPath. But this is starting to see a real shift in these types of deals we're seeing signed. Other things to watch out for, which are interesting, is like IBM, as an example, kind of got a bit ahead of the market with Watson, and then promoted the industry for everybody else. I think they're going to come back to market with a very heavy automation-led capability. I think we're going to start to see the same with a couple of other service providers who start to realize leading more with automation-driven type solutions is going to be a big way of shifting things. Yeah. Yeah. It's outsourcing. So it's an outsourcing deal which is all around transformation of process and implementation of automation based on UiPath, where IBM is doing all the services. So it's a services deal based purely on an automation transformation. Then we saw a couple of others getting signed, oddly enough, in Japan, one with IBM, one with another firm. And then we're starting to see, I think, some pretty brave deals being signed, particularly amongst some of the Indian heritage providers as well, where they are guaranteeing some significant savings down the line based on putting into line a lot of these metrics as well. So I think automation is going to play a significant role in a lot of these outsourcing deals as things evolve. So, and just so you can see here, we're currently doing a major study of users of RPA. It's still in the field, but I pulled some data off. These are 100 major users we spoke to, and you can actually see here, there's an average of 584 bots today in play per each of these users. It's going to increase to over 1,100 in 12 months' time. So there's almost a 100% increase in the amount of bots customers are looking at. I won't bore you too much with the automation-led deal, but there's a lot of shock and awe involved. So this all sounds fantastic, but when you actually look at what's happening, clients will go out, they'll select a robotics vendor, they'll get all excited, they'll put the software in, and then you have these tremendous issues we're seeing between IT and the business line, trying to get those functions working together to make this stuff effective. So we're seeing a lot of these deals hit rock bottom very, very quickly, sometimes in 6 months, before they start to realize they need to really bring together their business lines, because this isn't about major cost savings. This is about actually looking at the true data structure of your processes to figure out what is possible and what is not possible. But I can leave this. I think we're running a bit low on time here to some of you guys to take away. And so I'll leave some cards here if people want to take the slides away, because there's some other stuff around AI that I don't think we have enough time to really go into. So do we have maybe time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions before we wrap up today?
I was about to ask with regard to those, you present a slide with regard to labor arbitrage,
Yeah.
which is somehow decreasing as a result.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate please on that? I didn't manage to see all the numbers.
Sure. Sure. So we survey a big chunk of the Global 2000 every year, and we ask them whether they're increasing the number of offshore resources in their shared services or they're outsourcing. And so when we took the outsourcing piece in some of the back office areas like F&A and HR, companies are actually looking to decrease the offshore component, which when you look at what's happening in deals being signed in those spaces, you'll understand why. With IT, those areas are very high in terms of offshore components. They've gone down a bit, but they're still increasing, but more like 10% as opposed to 20%. So it's just really to show that in the BPO areas, the offshore component is now 0 to negative, And in the IT areas, it's still increasing, but at a decreasing rate. So this is where this whole sort of more for less paradigm comes into play.
In terms of the sum of sums, so it's not anymore driven by the cost, driven by some sort of knowledge that is built in.
I think it's both. I think a company kind of hit a wall with how much they wanted to offshore, and I think this is what happened in the F&A business. F&A is very recession driven. So when times are bad and people see we can drive out some fat from our F&A and offshore it, we saw a nice increase in F&A deals between 2009, 2014, but then they started to tail off again. And then when times are really good, people are slowing that right down and looking at value. So I think a lot of the low-hanging fruit in the BPO areas is gone. There isn't a lot left without taking on excessive risk. And I also think clients today aren't as excited about, oh, I can take 20% out, do some labor arbitrage, as they used to be. They're not just doing it because they have to. I think they're actually looking at how do we do this more intelligently and more smartly. And I think there's a much stronger appetite to look at automation than there is offshoring. So you hear a CFO today, they're talking about their next wave of efficiency is going to be from automation and digitalization. It's not going to be from labor arbitrage. Okay. Well, thank you all for your time. I hope you've had a good day.
We have one question.
One more question.
Don't mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The ability to kind of understand the processes of the industries really well, to break them down into process steps and then apply whatever technology that needs to be applied. So the ability to kind of break down industry awareness to process steps and do that at scale is also something that Indian service providers or offshoring at large can do. You see that component with, because automation, but that component of contextually aware process, managing process at scale, still being relevant and therefore being repurposed even while technology is changing.
I very much so. I think a lot of, when we get into more of these automation-driven deals, it's requiring a skill set that is about re-standardizing, finding new ways of efficiency, understanding some of the institutional processes of the clients. So we're seeing quite a few deals going out for rebid that have been running with some client for 10 years. And it's often that client puts it out for rebid because they're frustrated, because they want someone else to come in who's actually going to find that next wave of savings. And that's where it's forcing people to actually look at the process itself and how can you make changes to it. So what's interesting right now is there's a lot of legacy deals out in the marketplace up for rebid, and we're actually having to see competitors come in and take the business because they're willing to go in and disrupt the model. Talking to some of these providers, they're very unwilling to cannibalize their revenue. They'll say they are, but when it really comes down to it, they're not. And so this is where a lot of the pressure points are in the industry right now. I think, we've got numbers to show what's happening in the wake of automation. So we think that the total number of employees in the service delivery industry in India will decrease by 7.5% in 5 years. Now that's really natural attrition when you think about it. So it's not a heavy decrease, but it's not going to be increasing in terms of size. It's going to stay pretty constant, but there's going to be a refinement in the type of work they're taking on and the level of work that's being taken on as well. I think there'll also be quite a big increase in the number of niche technology firms popping up. There's a strong culture for startups, particularly in Bangalore and Delhi and some of these areas as well. So I do think that it's an exciting time for India as it moves out of this providing back office to more middle office, front office type capabilities to clients. Okay.
Right. Thank
you.
Thank you, folks. I think big thanks to the crowd. Though it was a limited crowd, it was very interactive. Then I'll allow Phil to finish the presentation. And Phil, thanks a lot for your time and presentation. This is small. Thanks a lot. Yeah. Thank you, guys. So, and most of the conversations are happening in downstairs from now on.